of oppression.
It's about time for the people to rise up and say we should decide what's right.
They're calling for a modern American revolution. Thousands of people from a multitude of groups occupying Wall Street day in and day out, highlighting what they say are social and economic inequalities. Their message has spread, so too have the demonstrations, to dozens of American cities. And now preparations are underway to occupy Canada in the coming days. So tonight we explore the making of a movement, starting off with our Duncan McHugh in Vancouver.
Did you see what happened in Boston yesterday?
Swept up in a protest without a headquarters, without a leader, Min Reyes is tweeting about a revolution.
Did you say no to Black Bloc's anarchist?
She's pretty new to protesting, but inspired by the Arab Spring, disaffected with democracy in Canada, she's dropping out of college, ready to occupy Vancouver.
I think humanity should come before profits. Like, I don't want to look back and say, hey, you know, I could have joined the movement and made a difference, but I decided to stay in school.
It's week 4 of the movement known as Occupy Wall Street.
The United States of America!
Anger toward bank bailouts and corporate greed shows no signs of abating.
If you do not immediately and peacefully disperse, you will be arrested.
Demonstrators' demands have never been exactly clear, but that was the idea from the get-go. It was Vancouver's anti-consumerist magazine Adbusters that first called for a people's occupation. This ad, with its rhetorical yet provocative question, went viral. The magazine, famous for attacking corporate culture, now champions what it calls a Robin Hood tax on banks.
If Americans blame Canada for all these protests, well, now it's coming full circle. Canadian activists are gearing up to carry the torch in Toronto, Victoria, Edmonton, Calgary, Ottawa, and Montreal. Here in Vancouver, activists plan to take over this public space on Saturday. For how long, no one's sure, but some are bringing tents.
It's a numbers game!
Mind you, the Occupy Vancouver tent will need to be pretty big to accommodate so many different agendas.
If you're unhappy with student debt, or if you're unhappy with environmental destruction in the name of, or just trying to push people before profits.
My taxes are fighting a war right now instead of feeding the homeless. You know, I had a guy sleeping in my bag machine, bought him breakfast this morning, told him to come camp out here because, you know what, it's just as much his fight too.
That fight will be non-violent, say folks here, but downtown businesses still smarting from the Stanley Cup riots are taking no chances.
And we know it's particularly aimed at big business and corporate greed, so those companies know who they are, and they'll just need to prepare for that and maybe hire security guards.
However, worth noting, the American protests, which keep growing unexpectedly, have also been relatively peaceful. Unexpectedly. Duncan McHugh, CBC News, Vancouver.
So that's the situation in Vancouver. But this movement started in the United States, rooted in economic frustration. And new numbers released just this week show just how worse off the average American is now. Between 2008 and 2009, average household income dropped by about 3%. In the last 2 years, post-recession, it's fallen a further 6.7%. Average household income in the U.S. is now just under $50,000. Add it all up, and in the last 3 years, the average U.S. family is bringing in about 10% less, the largest drop in decades. And as Keith Bogue explains now, the worsening U.S. economy is truly at the center of demonstrations there.
In Los Angeles, the Occupy Wall Street movement has camped out at City Hall, but their complaint is the same as what's heard in Manhattan. They claim to speak for 99% of the population against the powerful 1% whom they say control the economy, politics, and the media.
My friends
don't even get why I'm doing this. You know, my family, like, they kind of get it, but they don't get it. And it's because they're part of that 98% that doesn't know enough, or they're too comfortable, or they're too naive, or they just don't get it. Whatever it is, they're asleep.
The 99% of us who are asleep becomes 98% because the protesters don't include themselves in that group.
This observation that there is an enormous and growing gap between the rich, the 1%, and everyone else in the United States is nothing new. It's been evident for decades. People who live in neighborhoods like this one are fully aware that just a little bit farther down the road, there are neighborhoods like this one where people can spend tens of millions of dollars building a house like that during a recession. So why is Occupy Wall Street happening now?
The 2008 Wall Street meltdown put the spotlight on something that had developed over many years. A tiny number of people had figured out ways to become extraordinarily wealthy, billionaires, by leveraging money and betting on the direction of markets while producing essentially nothing. Economist Manuel Pastor of the University of Southern California says that Wall Street has used its political power to protect itself from the economic realities of the rest of the country.
Finance within the United States has essentially been able to manipulate the economy and politics in a way that makes sure that that sector has been spared, but the rest of the economy has been shattered, that their interests have been met, but the interests of the unemployed have been put to one side.
Against that backdrop, three things happened in relatively close proximity to each other this past summer. One, it became clear the U.S. economy is not growing its way out of recession. Two, politicians allowed themselves to be caught up in an unnecessary and destructive game of chicken about whether to do what they had no choice but to do, increase the debt ceiling. And three, one of the richest people in the country, multi-billionaire Warren Buffett, said that people like himself were protected by Congress from paying their fair share of taxes. In a letter to the New York Times, Buffett wrote, "My friends and I have been coddled long enough by a billionaire-friendly Congress. It's time for our government to get serious about shared sacrifice."
Those three things really help to explain the timing of Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy Wall Street has been criticized as scattered and inarticulate in its demands. But increasingly it is getting credit for one thing, picking the right target. Keith Bogue, CBC News, Los Angeles.